Welcome to Revolution Against Evolution. I'm your host, Doug Sharp.
And your co-host, Rich Gear here, and we're actually doing this live tonight, Doug. It's kind of, it's always live, but not remotely. Usually you're up in Grand Rapids, and I'm down here in Okemos, so it's kind of nice to have you here.
Nice to be back in the studio again.
Yeah.
So tonight, Rich, we're going to talk a little bit about a full-fledged theory.
Yeah.
Which means we're going to be talking a little bit about feathers.
Yep.
And the creatures that wear them, like the birds.
Yep.
And I don't think there's anything else that.
Well, not according to the evolutionists, who have been trying for, well, really since Huxley. He tried to first propose back in the 1800s, and it's kind of gone in and out of favor over the years, but it's really popular now. The birds are basically just dinosaurs that are running around today. That's basically the dinosaurs evolved into birds, and they've been trying to do this for at least 25, 30 years that I know of, where they're trying to find everything with microraptors and velociraptors and all these, trying to make the thing about birds. They've been trying to show all kinds of things in the fossil record that these might be bird appendages. The famous one, of course, is the most famous one they've used over the years has been archaeopteryx.
Right.
Yeah, that's the one that they've used, which they've, for quite a while now, they've recognized that as a true bird, which in some respects is kind of interesting, Doug, because according to their timeline, the evolutionists, that is, this archaeopteryx existed before the supposed feathered dinosaurs existed. So, that kind of really, to me, nobody really talks about that much, but that really makes it kind of strange. So, anyway, Doug, so let's talk about this full-fledged theory here,
Right. There's an article that I have from Dr. Jerry Bergman, which it talks about the complex anatomy of the feather. And I think this is the sticking point in terms of where you're trying to prove that birds evolved from dinosaurs is how do the scales come to be feathers? And how do they make all the modifications in the DNA and the RNA and all the proteins that make up the coating to make the feathers from the scales? And here is an experiment that you evolutionists should try. You should take the scale, take the DNA out of the scale, maybe to the proteins and analyze all the components of the scales and do the same thing for feathers.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Compare them and see then what the differences are in the DNA that are in the scales and in the feathers.
Okay.
And then map out a pathway for which you can take the scale DNA and then by one point mutation at a time, then create the feather DNA, and keep all the design elements working throughout the process.
That's the big sticking point, it would seem to me, because usually what we find out is when something doesn't work, a part of something doesn't work, usually nothing works. Although you can have minor, we've seen that when you have decays or mutations or anomalies on the DNA structure, you can still make things sort of work. It's kind of like, it reminds you of, Doug, you ever see those things they give you these, it's kind of like reading something. We can, and then they'll put numbers and flip letters backward, and you still find out John 3:16. I can still read it even though I got different letters and numbers and characters. But we have enough information. But with DNA, it doesn't work that way very well. In fact, after a few things, it basically breaks down really, really, really fast and complete. And so I've always wondered about how you went by point mutation, go from a scale to a feather. The other thing, Doug, is that I was reading something earlier today. Scales are like they're not really individual things. They're kind of like sheets, where a feather is an individual barb, out of the skin. It's different. It's like a whole different way it functions. You know what I'm saying? So just something that came to my mind.
The morphology of the feather is pretty complex.
Yes.
They're made for flight. You have a long shaft. You don't have that in a scale, and then which it's usually hollow and it's always strong, and then there's a webbing that flares out from the shaft that connects together, sort of like a Velcro.
Yes, yeah.
type of thing as the Velcro. And if you watch a bird and it's preening its feathers, what has happened is that some of the feathers have come apart, and what he's doing is he's actually taking his bill and going down the feather and connecting everything back together again.
And think about that instinct, Doug. Where would that come from a reptile? You know,
right?
Yeah, I mean, you know. I just, the idea that you have to preen your feathers to make them work. It's almost like if it's not fully functional, it's not going to function at all. I mean, these proto feathers. See, the thing is, Doug, what I've been interested in is like some of these things they've come up with these supposedly these things that they're proto feathers, but they really seem more like tendons or they might be ligament type. They're not really. They seem like be protein. Filaments or something. They're not really feathers that I can see, So I don't know. But I've always been interested, Doug, because there may be some things in dinosaurs that we don't really see with just the fossilization. I think in terms of like the Chinese dragon. Now we always think of that as embellished reptilian creature, but look at all the frills and weird stuff that they have on some of the creatures that they draw in the Chinese dragon. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I've always wondered if some of that stuff might be just that, but it's still. I think your premise of analyzing the DNA, although you could do that from a modern scale and a modern feather. We obviously can't go from back in the very often go back to dinosaur stuff. Although we have been finding some soft tissue.
Obviously, they would have been very much closer together back there when the reptiles started jumping out of the trees.
I thought they were jumping up into the trees. Isn't that the one that there's two different versions of it?
Well, you have them climbing the trees and then jumping out and gliding down, and then eventually the feathers appear and the gliding becomes a little bit easier. The morphology of the feather, though, Jerry Bergman talks about they're flaring out from the shaft. Is our planar structures called veins, and they serve as solid but a flexible support for the branches called barbs. And then the rachis and the barbs are analogous to tree trunks and tree branches. Each parallel barb slanks diagonally from the shaft and has numerous smaller side branches or barbules, or webs of different types that overlap those of the neighboring barbs, the whole feather. The flight feather of a large bird can have as many as 1 million barbules.
Wow.
The barbules in flying birds are held together with a next web by hooklets called hamuli that function much like Velcro. The branches in the hamuli form a web sufficiently flexible, yet also stiff and dense enough so that when the bird flies, very little air or water can seep through the spaces. The branches and the hooklets are in turn called barbicels. So, so there's all sorts of different features of the feather that really are different, and you have to explain their origin through the evolutionary scenario. And so in order to have a full-fledged theory, you have to explain the feathers.
It's funny, I did a supposed drawing for Jerry Bergman several years ago about the evolution of the feather, and it was just really, it's really science fiction. This is not science. And so and so Doug, that's the feather construction. What did you analyze? Did you talk about the difference between that and what a scale is like? Okay, what is a scale?
Well, a scale, of course, is much different. They're both part of the integumentary system, which is the skin structure, outer structure of the creatures. But the theory that the evolutionists propose is that the original function of feathers were for insulation.
Oh, okay.
So that was sort of like the intermediary function.
Okay.
But the question is, while trying to fly, what was it trying to do in the meantime? It was just.
Well, it's like the old thing, Doug. We said, how much wood could a woodpecker peck if a woodpecker couldn't peck wood? He'd bash his brains out. It's like unless it works, it doesn't work. And the intermediate propositions that they've come up with really are not very satisfactory in any sense. That even you can't even imagine how it would what kind of an intermediate function would proto feathers have? What would they do? Well, you said maybe insulation. Okay, that's a possibility, but it just seems like, why would it ever decide to go into the idea of flight? I mean, that's another thing, Doug. I don't know if you got in this article. My son sent me an article. I couldn't find it. I was trying to. It was his boss actually wrote it. Mm-hmm. And a lot of these dinosaurs that they talk about, they're like proto birds or like feathered dinosaurs. Often number one, they're usually very small. Although we have some pretty good sized birds, emus and ostriches and things of that are pretty good. They're usually flightless. And these feathered so-called feathered dinosaurs, he said the way the arm is reconstructed is inaccurate, or he thinks it was not correct. In other words, a bird's wing kind of folds back. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? It goes, and they're constructing it like this. You know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of how bad they reconstructed the iguanodon back in the iguanodon, the dinosaur back in the 1840s. It was kind of on four legs, and they put the spike on his thumb. They put it on his nose, and you know what I mean? So, and when I read that article, I went, "Wow, he had 5." I thought salient points, and I can't remember what all they were, of the difference between a bird and a dinosaur. And that's the big thing right now. They're microraptors, and then the biggest one they used years ago, in 1999, it came out. Remember the National Geographic that turned out to be a fraud, the archaeopteryx?
Yeah.
You remember that one? That was, we got a bird dying. This proves it, and it turned out it was a hoax. But since then, they've come up with all kinds of stuff. And he thinks, and I looked at the way they were constructed. Those arms are not. They have the arms out like this, Doug. Mm-hmm. Well, they really should be built more. They should be more like this, right, like a bird wing. These feathered dinosaurs, which is kind of disturbing to me, because then that means a velociraptor might be a bird. Mm-hmm. not like the other thing was like the three clawed thing, and dinosaurs had 3 claws, but the bird claws and the dinosaur claws are different digits. Mm-hmm. They're not even the same. I think the bird is 1, 2, 3, and the dinosaurs is 2, 3, and 4, 2, 3, and 5, or something like that. I just anyway. The point of it is, don't hold me to that, but they're different. Why would they have? And we have even the archaeopteryx. Some of them have 2 claws, some of them have 3 claws.
Right.
They're not. They're which might be, and guess what? They're all juveniles. And we're finding out a lot of we have there's I wrote it down here. Yeah, there's several.
You have the main clause and the subordinate
clause. But you got, let's see if I can take I got it. There's the corygips, the circus, the otis, and the rattus, and they basically all have claws as juveniles. And oftentimes they lose them when they become adults. All the archaeopteryxes are juveniles.
Right.
There's 10 species apparently, or 9, 10 of them, and they're all juveniles, and we don't know, but they're all the artists, and I'm an artist, okay? They've rendered them all as adults.
Yeah.
And that's an artistic license, but they should have their license revoked.
Well, aren't there some birds that actually have claws? Well,
claws and teeth. Yep.
Watson is one of them.
Watson, yep, that's the one that does, and he's got, and that's the one I can't remember which one they have. They actually have teeth. That was the thing that I look. The archaeopteryx has teeth and these claws, but the teeth, I don't know. I see, and it might be the Watson has teeth. I'm not sure about that.
Well, gray-leg goose has teeth.
Has teeth? Okay.
And there's another. The beaks of the gray-leg goose, the teeth are pretty fine.
Okay, but they have,
They have them. And you have a lot of different designs of birds. For example, the woodpecker, instead of having 3 claws in front and 1 in back, you have 2 claws in front and 2 in back.
Oh, yeah.
And so and the woodpecker design is so much different than anything else. He was made, if he didn't have all the shock absorbing features in his beak, in his beak and his head, he'd just knock his brains out.
How much wood could a woodpecker pack? Yeah, that's the thing, Doug. You look at stuff like that. when I was reading again, I was looking at stuff. How many? And we'll have no way of really knowing this. This is all total speculation, but there's not like we don't necessarily believe there was one bird kind.
Uh-huh.
There might have been several, or maybe many, but because like he's talking about the description of the woodpecker. But how about the penguin or the ostrich? These flightless birds, and they're way different than let's say a cardinal or a robin. And even it's just interesting how different things. Because we know that a species can interbreed with one another at some point. They may not be directly, like a lion will not breed with a house cat, but the house cat might be able to breed with a different kind of a cat, can breed with another cat, which can eventually breed with a lion if you want to. But generally speaking, they're all cat. They're the cat kind, and that's the thing with birds. It talks about after their kinds. He's going to make the flying creatures after their kinds, and that could be speaking, of course, of bats as well as pteranodons or pterodactyls, as well as birds. So they're all flying kinds. But you wonder if there aren't just different kinds of birds as well. Those are things we talk about when we talk about speciation, and generally it's at the family level that the word kind, the word Bergman, which is used in the Hebrew to describe it in Genesis the early chapters of Genesis when he's making them after their kind. It's not the word species, even though sometimes we kind of conflate the two. They're different, but it's generally more at the family level. But again, Doug, let's go back to, I see a picture of a peacock feather. That's something.
I think the peacock sort of gave Darwin some fits.
Some nightmares? Well, he never liked the eye. What about the eyes on the peacock feather?
Yeah, it's just you can't really imagine that type of structure coming about by chance. It just seems to be a beautiful design, and the question is the little dance that they do. And they spread out those feathers, and the turkey does the same little thing with his little plumage, and turkey has a interesting thing on his beak called the snood.
Yeah, the male turkey. Yeah, or is it they both have it?
The male has
the
beard.
Yeah.
I had 3 turkeys on my deck the other day.
Did you really?
Yeah.
Those turkeys, they come up on my deck too sometimes. Generally, they're out in my front yard. There's a lot of room out there, so yeah.
But it's kind of interesting to speculate what really happened in the past. There wasn't. I don't think there was any evolution of birds of sorts except divergence of species.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
And that's what you observe when you're looking at changes that take place, like the beaks of the finches and the Galapagos.
Galapagos finches. Yeah.
You have some adaptation, and the adaptations go back and forth based upon
they brought
environment.
Didn't they bring them back, some of the pigeons from the Galapagos, and overgenerate? They went back to their normal beak size. Yeah, that was interesting.
And so, what really originated the whole idea of feathered dinosaurs, and why that became such a popular thing in the last few years. And even some creationists have picked up upon it and said, well, that could have been a thing. Well, what if it was, It was still a design by God.
Yeah.
But the question is, the evidence for the feathered dinosaurs is so minuscule that
it's minuscule, and it's also very speculative. It's not. It was I described earlier. The guy could construct the arms of the Microraptor and even the Velociraptor. They can reconstruct the arms so they bend more backward like a bird's wing.
Mm-hmm.
And I go, wow, that puts a whole new thinking on it. He gave several other things as well in this article. I was trying to get a hold of my son to see if we could, because it's his boss down in Answers Genesis, but if he could tell me where that article was. I mentioned it when I was down there. I was down in Kentucky last weekend, and we had a men's conference down there, and it was, and I asked him, but then we didn't get back to me. So it doesn't really matter. My point is that really you could find that probably on Andrews Jensen's website, the reconstructing of some of these birds or these supposed feathered dinosaurs, and they really are nothing more than birds. And as I say, that's why they're always very small. The Velociraptor is not as big as it is in Jurassic Park. You know, Jurassic Park, they're like 6-7 feet tall. No, they're more like they're the size of a turkey, basically. Okay?
Yeah.
They're fairly small. And so, I mean, that's pretty good size for a bird. But I look at the turkeys in my front yard, Doug, and they're big.
They are big.
You know, and of course we have, as I said, ostriches and emus, those are 6 feet tall birds. I still remember the time that ostrich poked his head through the window down in Texas, Doug.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that was hilarious.
Yeah, I've been bitten by an ostrich twice.
Yes.
In the same place, too, at Fossil Rim Nature Center in Glen Rose, Texas. But it was just, the thing of it is that you just have to be careful with those birds.
Well, they want their food, and they say, "Oh, a bird's seed, that's mine." Boom, they'll come right near. They have no fear. Well, they're protected, and animals, that's when they sense they're protected, they're going to take advantage of that kind of stuff. But I think it shocked you. It shocked me. I went, "Whoa, what was that?" Yeah. And you were.
Well, he went after my entire bag, and so,
yeah, that's exactly what he wanted.
The thing that's interesting is that flight. It would have had to evolve about 4 or 5 different times.
Right.
And that's
so Doug, we have the bird.
You have the bat.
The bat.
You have insects. And then you have flying reptiles.
So that's 4.
Flying fish.
They don't really fly, though.
Okay.
They kind of glide,
Flying squirrels.
Okay.
It was interesting years ago when I took Karen out to Arizona. She had a friend in Texas that we stopped by and visited who had flying squirrels as pets.
Oh, is that right? I didn't know you could. Well,
yeah, they have. You have to have sort of like an aviary for them.
Is that right?
And have a dedicated room for them, and then they breed in that. But they fly to you, and if you got a little pocket, they like to hide in that.
They're that domesticated, huh?
Yeah,
wow.
they're pretty tame, and they'll jump from you to somebody else, and it's really
because they got like a flap of skin from their forearm to their leg, right? Is that how they work? Yeah. Yeah, and they glide. But they're just another kind of squirrel, though, right?
They are just another kind of squirrel. But bats and you have these mammals that can glide and fly, and the question is, why don't you think about a designer who has the same computer program, the same design, but you use it here and here and here.
Doug, and we have talked about things like that in the past. Like, and you kind of, if you as a person who likes to create pictures, people can recognize my style.
Right.
Okay. And the world is framed with an oxygen, carbon-based, life form, and oxygen and water is used for all sorts of life. Yeah, there are some kind of weird anomalies. Those people, those life forms that live in those volcanic vents in the bottom of the ocean. But by and large, we're all designed, and even the evolutionists use the word designed, all the time. Because you almost can't escape the conclusion. I remember, Doug, years ago, I took a bunch of kids from there was a Christian kind of nightclub around called Visions, and they were all Richard Dawkins was coming to Michigan State, and they were sponsored by the University Atheistic Society, right? And they were kind of intimidated. There was about 10 men and women that I came with. Let's go see him, see what he has to say. He spent almost an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours, just telling you why the airplane wing had to be designed, but a bird's wing was by accident. And the hubris, the unwillingness to see real design in something that, because it's, obviously the airplane wing we know, but it's usually stiff. Now, granted, we have helicopter wings and some things of that nature, but generally speaking, airplane wings are stiff. They don't breathe. They don't shed their, and then suddenly grow into something new. If a wing falls off, guess what? You die. Mm-hmm. Okay, but on a bird, when feathers fall off, they get regenerated. They grow back in. There's a living thing about it, And I think that brings me to an example. I always tell people, I say, man has an organization because we were made in the image of God. We have this desire to imitate our Creator. But our organization, when we make it turns out to be it's a box. Yes, it's clean, it looks pristine, looks good, but it's sterile. It doesn't live. God, even in this fallen world, maybe that's because it is fallen, God's organization is like a tree. It's messy, but it lives, it breathes, it grows fruit, shade, and it grows. And where man just stays static. Because we can only imitate so much. Doug, I think about the project I'm doing for the museum, and they called me back in. I have to make these fake logs. They look really real, but they were never alive. Mm-hmm. And I think about the design elements here. I once presented to somebody. I said, well, you talk about evolution like there's a common ancestor. What about a common designer? It's an old argument we've used, but it just all depends on what blinders you have on, Doug.
Well, if you see common structures in different creatures, you can conclude either you have homology, which is common descent, or you have the designer having a common code for these different structures.
And Doug, your point about the four or five different flying things, even the DNA coding is different in each of these.
They are, yeah.
So you'd have to say this evolutionary process happened 4 times or 5 times. And I'm going, what the heck? That doesn't... It's so astronomically impossible even for it to happen 1 time. And let alone the same thing 5 times. A common designer makes a lot more sense. We have the same atmosphere, the same oxygen, the same things, but then you look at the bird's oxygen system, the way the oxygen goes through its body to support its high metabolism, those kinds of things. We're not even talking about the feather right now, but it's all about the bird structure. His lungs are much different than a reptile's.
And the muscles.
Yes.
You have the scales on the reptile. Are you going to start developing muscles behind these scales that are turning into feathers in order to develop a flying mechanism? Now you have flying reptiles, but they are also designed. And so they're much different than other reptiles. You don't, and nobody I understand really argues for the Rhamphorhynchus to be evolving into birds.
That always surprised me. Why they don't start with Pteranodon or Rhamphorhynchus or pterodactyl or they don't start with any of these. There are lots even smaller ones. Why don't they talk about that? It's interesting because dinosaurs. I always tell people, like, when I give a thing, I present. I'll take a swimming one, and I'll ask the kids. I said, "Is this a dinosaur?" And they'll scream, "Yeah." No, it's not a dinosaur, because a dinosaur is a man-made word. Same thing. I said, "What about this guy? He's a land animal, because dinosaurs are always land animals." Mm-hmm. So what about this one? Well, yeah. No, it's not, because his legs don't walk upright like a mammal. Mm-hmm. Okay, and then of course you go the flying ones. As I said, I kind of gave it away earlier. It can't be a dinosaur. We talked about this. This is not a dinosaur because it's not a land one. But now I have took up Acrocanthosaurus or T-Rex, and then Brachiosaurus. These are all dinosaurs. They're either what they call Saurischia or Ornithischia, which is bird-hipped or lizard-hipped, okay?
Yeah. Well, I think that the whole idea of feathers evolving from scales is horse feathers.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah.
But I think that we really don't have to be intimidated by this argument. We'll see you next time on Revolution Against Evolution.